know, you and I don't know if anybody doesn't travel like this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, for the local guys.
Yeah, it'd be tough not to, right?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There's no fight.
There's no more.
And
Yeah.
those are kind of small.
Well, because everybody's got everything. I mean, I saw that one trailer that you walked me into in North Carolina. Everything's so organized and just you've got prepared for anything.
Well, look at this one. We got to use this one last week.
How we doing, Grace? Oh, are we live, Grace? Let me make sure here.
Oh, yeah.
I think we're live. Okay. All right, everybody. So, all right. I'm not used to this yet. Just hit it. Okay. So, in this session, I originally named this the right fogging, misting, and spray equipment, but really, I guess you could think of this as like the right application equipment. Okay? And the first statement that I would make, and are we good on that screen, Grace? I think we are. Might have to go over here and do this over here. Okay. There's a lot of things to consider, not too many, but enough things to consider that will tell you which direction to go in specifically with spray equipment. I'm going to do a little crossover here, but hopefully this will make sense. I also handed out a sheet, by the way, on these heavy-duty pump sprayers. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we chose to import these and carry them specifically. Okay, rule of thumb is if you have a high viscosity product, a paint, a coating, something like that, or anything that requires pressure, like a sealant, for example, on the surface, so it penetrates better, you want to use an airless sprayer, okay, like an airless paint spray system. If you're low viscosity, you're trying to avoid chemical blowback, or the product that you're using is meant to penetrate not only the substrate that you're working on, but soil load where you need dwell times and things like that, the rule of thumb is low pressure. Okay, now there's a couple considerations. Let me make sure I get this right here. Yep. Okay, so here's a picture of it. Low viscosity products, low pressure. High viscosity products, high pressure. And then we've got the chemical compatibility side of things. What I mean by that is if you've got an airless sprayer right here, the internal guts of an airless sprayer, and then the rings and things of that nature are not compatible with things that are extremely acid, extremely alkaline, or especially oxidizers. Okay, so when we're talking about oxidizers, what I mean by that is peroxides, chlorinated products, chlorine dioxides, things that we use in this industry all the time. Okay, so that's another reason why you want to make sure that you go to the low pressure side of things. Now, I can only speak for us specifically. When we go into even something as simple as this heavy duty pump sprayer right here, all the rings in this are Viton, okay? So you're never going to get leaks and things like that developing with these. But what becomes just as important, and I think I probably have this on the next slide, okay, that's soil load, is the tip sizes and control that you have over this, okay? So if I can just for a second point to this, one of the other benefits of a more expensive sprayer like this, honestly, is that everything on here can be replaced. So it doesn't matter if you break the handle, break something on the wand, break this release valve right here. All of this comes in parts, okay? You could break the canister itself or the base itself. It's all individual parts for replacement, meaning that it's worthwhile to have a little bit better unit and have the control and everything else that this brings to the table. I mentioned this pressure release. This only will allow you to pump up to 50 PSI. Okay, so that's a very low pressure system. But when we spray this, you're going to see, man, we're getting, a good 3 foot of projection out of it. We're getting, 20-inch wide spray patterns that are very consistent and even. So it really will increase your efficiency on a job. I'm sure we've all used that, spray system or like a pump up sprayer from like a Walmart or a Home Depot or whatever. And it, has a very inconsistent pattern to it, and it kind of spurts and sputters and things. This is as close as we've found to getting to like an electric system, but in a pump up, outfit. Okay. So that is, I'll pull that back here so it doesn't get in your way. That is the heavy duty pump system. Now, soil load is also a consideration. So you've got low soil load. And when I talk about soil load, that's just a term for anything on the surface that's making it dirty. That could be mold, but it could be buildup from like smoking, right? Or it could just be dirt, like anything from dust and debris all the way through mold, mildew, asbestos, anything like that. General terminology would be soil load, okay? And so if we're in a low soil load environment or already have a clean surface, of course, we can go right to disinfection alone. It might not require cleaning. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more when we discuss disinfection and dwell times in just a little bit here. In a high soil load environment, keep in mind that you're going to have to pre-clean that surface prior to disinfection. So what does that mean for like tip sizes and things? Well, this has, or had yesterday, because we were doing a React Extract for fire damage, this had oxypar in it. And the tip size that we chose for this is what's called a 8001, okay? So I can take these tips in and out very easily. If it wears over time, all I have to do is replace a button tip, which is extremely inexpensive to do. So not only does that give me the control that I'm looking for, but it gives me efficiency as well. I'm not wasting chemical, for example, right? And at the surface, it's giving me a misting tip. Well, as you'll see with React Extract, which is our mold remediation system, our fire damage system, things like that, all that we're looking for out of that from a misting standpoint is the reaction that occurs. So we can limit like dripping and things like we were talking about with the suits prior by being able to control the tip size. So the 80 stands for 80 degrees. And what we've seen is that an 80-degree tip will give you, depending upon your pressure, 18 to up to 24 inches of spray pattern, like a flat spray pattern width on the surface when you're anywhere between 12 and 18 inches from that surface, okay? When we bump that up to an 8002, just a tenth of a gallon more, now we go to a true spray pattern. We're getting the same look and feel to the surface, but now we go from misting to soil load penetration, surface penetration, speed, okay? So there are times when misting is going to make a lot of sense. Disinfection, right? We'll talk about concentrations of disinfectants in a little while. And if you're working, especially like on a 400 part per million Deuterion disinfectant, you've only got a 1 minute dwell time that you have to achieve on that. So misting, as long as you're able to stay, you're able to keep that surface wetted for 60 seconds, misting might be all that you need. So again, you're controlling how much product goes to the surface. Whereas if you were, let's say, like in a quaternary ammonium chloride solution that requires a 10-minute dwell time on it, you got to have a much larger tip to keep that surface wetted out for 10 consecutive minutes so that you get the kills claims that you're looking for. So tip selection really does mean a lot to efficiency and all the other little parameters, like is it going to drip or not? Am I going to have to reapply to get that full 10 minutes out of a disinfectant or something like that? And then when it comes to soil load, that tip selection is going to be the difference between penetrating through it to the surface to lift, suspend, and remove that soil load from the surface, be it mold or anything else, or maybe having to reapply multiple times, which affects your labor, right? So as we went through this process of selecting like the right sprayers that fit our products, and we were working in the field to create the most efficiency, everything came down to tip selection. So you're going to notice that in a lot of our step-by-step guides on Work Drive and on the website and things like that, that we will refer to tip sizes from a best practices standpoint, but your mileage might vary. You might be in a warmer climate like we are here in Oklahoma, where it dries out very quickly, and you find like that 0.2 tip is exactly what you need for specific disinfection jobs, but that you don't need a 0.4 tip, right? So it really allows you to dial that in a very inexpensive way, okay? By the way, for all of your tips, there's this handy little thing right here, so you can keep, I'll just show this to the camera, so that you can keep tips right here in this pedal. So it not only works really well for keeping your foot on something to pump it up, but also just to store your tips away. And then if you can see this, we can just click that right in there and we're good to go. Okay. I'll hold that up for everybody to see, right? It just kind of nests right in there. So it's nice and compact. One of my customers had mentioned, man, it would be nice if we could put like a magnet on that and just stick it right to, you know, the sides of vans and things like that for easy storage going down the road, like a really, you know, powerful magnet. So it's something I'm looking to do as we get a delivery truck on the road. Okay, so we've spoken about soil loads now. Efficiency and dwell time. Sometimes I get ahead of myself. These are what button tips look like, right? On one side, for moderate temperatures, environments requiring low dwell times, a misting tip like this is going to work for you. You'll notice as you go into these, into either low or high temperatures, then low temperatures because surfaces contract, right? And you need a little bit more product on that surface because a lot of these cleaners, disinfectants, things like that have surfactants in them. A surfactant is a shortened term for surface active agent. Okay, you probably heard it thrown around, but what that does is it makes water wetter so it penetrates. But you'll need more product in cooler weather or in hotter weather because you know you're going to dry too quickly in hotter weather. So expect to kind of go up on your tip sizes a little bit in attics, right? Especially, or in any area that's warmer, and also when it's cooler. In a little while, I'll also go into, last year we started making a product called Speed Zero, so that if you're working on harder substrates like OSB, think of how much glue is in OSB, or if you're working on colder substrates, Speed Zero actually it's a alcohol-based product that allows it to penetrate faster, but in the wintertime, it brings those freezing points down so you can work at lower temperatures as well. All right. So this is kind of a quick look at nozzle coverage, right? The smaller the first two numbers on the nozzle, the smaller the fan width. So that 80, right, 01, the first two numbers are always going to be your fan width. We could go down to a 0 where you just have a pin, right? And then you can go in increments like 15s. You can go to 40 degrees. You can go to 80 degrees, and you can even go up to about 110 or 115 degrees. That's a really wide fan pattern. And then that second number is where you get that it shouldn't say width there. That should be your output, right? In tenths of gallons per minute, generally a 0.1, 0.2. If you see an 80, 10, that means it's a 1 gallon per minute tip. Okay? That's a lot of product flooding the surface. And unless you're getting into things like soil treatments where you're treating for odor, in an area or something like that, where you got to flood an area, for example, you're probably rarely going to need like a 1 gallon per minute tip, but it could happen. You could need a 2 gallon per minute tip or a 4 gallon per minute tip, but just know that tip size is almost infinitely variable, so that it might be the only thing that you need to change out on a job sometimes to become much more efficient. So if you run into something like that where you're going, we are up against that soil treatment where we're having to treat for odor under a house or something like that, or there's just something that comes up where you go, man, I wish we could put more product faster to the surface. It doesn't require us going into a fully electric system to do that. We can do that starting here. And I love getting people started with a pump sprayer system like this for two reasons. Number one, they'll never grow out of it because you're always going to have those small jobs that you need to do that you don't want to break out a big rig or something for and have the cleanup and things like that. But I'm going to step over here and hopefully y'all can hear me all right. I'll try to project that way. When you get beyond a couple jobs per week, like mold jobs, I'll just tell you a quick story about this. We've got a great customer over in Nashville called Ace Mold Proof. And they could always outsell their ability to produce jobs. And especially when you've got a labor market that's tight, this can become really important. So like if I start with an example and say, imagine the average mold remediation job that might take 2.5, 3 days, okay? Because you're talking about a HEPA sandwich, S520 mold job. I'm not talking like just stain removal or something like that. I'm talking full on containment, all of these sorts of things. Well, there's a lot of manual labor that goes into that. So what we were looking for was a system, and I keep referring to it by talking about React Extract, where we could take the knowledge that we had of industrial cleaning. Okay, so I come from a background in textiles, and in textiles, you always have to create a clean surface before you do anything else. And that's the similarity that it has to a lot of other industries where you create a clean surface, and now what do you want to do to that surface to make it perform? Do you want it to be fire retardant? Do you want it to, resist microbial growth? Do you want to seal it so that odor and things like that can't project like in a fire damage over time? But in order to get there, you have to create a clean surface, and you want to do that as quickly as possible. So here we can do React Extract with two different pump-up sprayers. Here we can go to a system that has two separate pumps in it, and then quick connect everything. I've got the hose back there right now, but quick connect everything, and then keep our equipment outside the environment entirely, where we just have individual guns and quick connect lances and quick connect tips, right? And everything to go along with it, so that you kind of look at this and you say, well, that's not a big deal. It looks great. You won't, most likely won't use it. One time I was on a job down in South Carolina. It was an attic job, and it was hot in the attic because it was like August, and we needed to change out tips. Do you know how miserable it is being, in 120 degrees, having to wrench out a tip and then possibly drop it down into insulation and then replace it with another tip when you could go from here to there, right? No, taking off the suit, coming down, wasting 30 minutes, getting a drink of water. It's just that simple, right? And so things like that were what drove us to developing the BTM spray system. So whereas where we started with ACE, and I'm wrapping back that story back around, when we started with ACE, we saw about a 40% reduction in labor once we got here with a reactive chemistry system that we could react the chemistry on the surface and then vacuum extract from the surface, instead of wipe downs and things like that. We were breezing over nails and splinters now with a wet vacuum because the moisture is our containment. Now we got a 70% reduction once we automated it with electric, okay? Because now you're not pumping anything up. The system's maintaining everything for you. The only change that you're making is, when you run out of a gallon or a 5-gallon pail, you're changing into, a new product, right? So this gave us tremendous efficiency. What the difference is being able to do about 3 jobs for every 1 job when you go electric, okay? So that's the jump. And where we saw that is if for the traditional remediator out there, it was the difference between maybe doing 2 jobs in a week versus being able to do 6 jobs, all things being equal, in the same amount of time, which is a huge difference in revenue, okay? Which is always, like, as you get to know us, you're going to know that we're like first focus on what can we do to improve our customers' revenue through all of the different costs, and labor, or the chokehold on labor is the biggest one, right? So this definitely has its place, but getting somebody started here in a system that they're never going to outgrow, and then knowing when to move to something like this is a deal changer. I'm going to stop there. Any questions or anything that I can answer on like the difference, why we go into low pressure rigs, for example, for cleaning, disinfection, and those sorts of things, and what the difference is between that and the higher viscosity coatings and sealants, or anything about tips, lances, anything that I can answer for you there. Okay. These lances, by the way, we can go as far down as 6 inches. We can go as far out as 79 inches. So then when we're dealing with like soffits and things like that, man, is it easy to not have to build a bridge over to a soffit in an attic and just right up the joist bays and that sort of thing. You're not getting into, high overhead stuff where, chemicals are raining down on you. You can stay back from the chemistry and really work with this thing nicely so that, we're maximizing safety. I forget what it's called when you have a lot of repetition, people begin having like joint problems and things like that, but they can kind of holster these things right here and, move very efficiently.
I have a question on that pump sprayer.
Yep.
Is there a strap that comes with that, or is it just sit on the floor?
It does sit on the floor. It's a 6 foot long. I'll just grab it for you.
And then that was going to be my next question. The length of that hose, does that affect the spray pattern on it? If it was a shorter hose, or would it be
On this hose here or on this one?
on that hose there?
Okay. No, it doesn't. Okay, so the question is, does the length of this hose affect spray pattern? This length doesn't. Now, if we were to extend it, right, if we were to say, hey, maybe we could get a 12-foot hose for it or something like that, I would imagine because of head pressure, we would probably be pumping it up more frequently. I've not tried it yet, but I would imagine so, right? I know with this, if you fill this halfway to 3/4 the way full, so you've got, a gallon to a gallon and a half in here, I know that you've got a good long head pressure on it, but I don't know what would happen if we extended the hose itself.
And it does not have a strap.
It does not. No. Yep. It's just like that, but it's got the good thing is it's not going to tip over on you. It's got a good wide base on it. Okay. Some application methods. There we go. All right. So I'm going to go through some kind of different scenarios and things in the workshop. This isn't everything, right? So we could talk about, 30 different products, but I just want to give you some ideas here because there's this question of, like, I get a question all the time, daily, like, can I fog that product, right? And I know what is really behind that. It's like, how fast can I get the job done, right? That's the ultimate question. But what we want to come back to is, what are we trying to accomplish, A, and is fogging it going to get us there? So the first example that I would give you is with a product called Knockdown, because Knockdown fog makes a lot of sense. And when I say fog, I mean like non-directionally fogged, okay? When I say non-directionally, it's like if we wanted to fill up this room with fog, okay, and the only measure of an adequate fog is reaching 100% relative humidity, right? Otherwise, you don't know if you've gotten to everything, because ultimately with a fog, you want to get to all surfaces, right? Not just the air, but all surfaces. So 100% RH is the measure of a successful fog. Well, if we were using something like Knockdown, where what we want to do is encapsulate anything that's airborne and drop it down to surfaces, or run the fog through like an air scrubber or something like that, then that's the right way to use fog. Trying to disinfect with fog is not the right way to go, okay? And the reason is that the definition of disinfection is wet dwell time on a surface. We can't guarantee a wet dwell time with a fog and efficacy. We can't, that's why it wouldn't be on an EPA registered label to fog a surface. Those things don't line up. It has nothing to do with dwell time, okay? Whereas the same piece of equipment where you're doing directional fogging, and out of that directional fogging, if I'm fogging a surface over here and that surface is becoming wetted out with that piece of equipment and I'm getting a 1 minute dwell time, at 400 parts per million, now I'm using the right piece of equipment for the application, which in that case would be disinfection. Does that make sense? Okay, directional versus non-directional. So there are some non-directional applications that can work really well. Odor mitigation, mold spore and lead or whatever the encapsulation might be that's airborne to drop everything from the surface. Outside of that, then we can use the fogger for misting. Okay. Likewise, now we could go, okay, sometimes the question is, what do we have available to us? The fogger's out on this job right now. What's our backup if we needed to miss something? Then it would be getting into that 0.1 gallon per minute tip. So we do have a backup or some redundancy there where we can know that across these different platforms, we've got that redundancy that if we needed to mist surfaces and still do that 1 minute dwell time, we would do it with a misting tip. And then the next thing becomes spraying. Right now we're moving up into 0.2, and we're probably getting away from the use of a fogger. Why? Because it takes longer now to use that fogger to spray a surface and get enough product on the surface to penetrate substrate, soil load, etc. So that's how you're kind of moving up in your application rates, your control, things of that nature. Okay. So I used OxyPrep here because if we're removing staining from a surface, you've got to penetrate that surface, right? Our OxyPrep is a chlorinated surfactant that you need to penetrate that surface in order to get that stain removal result that you're looking for. Okay. Now, we could go from that up to spraying. And I just kind of was thinking about like the storm coming into the Gulf right now. I was thinking, the perfect 1-2 punch for somebody like that is, let's say that they're working with sensitized populations down in an area like Tampa and things of that nature, Clearwater. That's going to be highly likely. Well, we probably would want to put them into our botanical antimicrobial, right? Where they're spray applying that with one of the guns, and maybe that's working as their cleaner and antimicrobial at the same time on that surface. And then in the other one, we might want to give them something like Fortify, because let's be honest, when you're doing kind of turning and burning on jobs that quickly, you might want something durable but water thin, where you don't have to change out your equipment, but where you're able to apply Fortify behind you. So just in case those moisture content levels are higher than we would like, we've got insurance built into that, so we can spray treat a durable antimicrobial on all of those surfaces and feel good about getting down the road to the next job. Okay, so I was just thinking about the scenarios that would play out there. Well, yeah, you could do it with pump sprayers, and the reason we formulated that as water thin is so that we could, right? It had that flexibility that you could spray it with anything. But ideally, we could be an electric system like the BTM sprayer and really move through a property very quickly, where you had one person on one gun, another person on another, and they're kind of chasing one another around the property, if that makes some sense. Okay, and then we finally get back into this area of airless spraying. And that's where we get back into the higher viscosity products, the safeguards, the max guards, the masonry guards, clear guards, things like that. Basically anything that ends in a guard, you're gonna know is a higher viscosity product. So it doesn't matter if we're trying to seal for seepage and that sort of thing, or if we're trying to seal wood, or in the future, we're going to be doing our liquid applied vapor barriers for the sides of buildings to replace house wrap, and our roof systems for commercial roofing and all those sorts of things. Airless sprayer will be the way to go on all of that. And when we talk about the coatings in a little bit, we're going to talk about wet film thickness, how to gauge that so you're on spec for warranties, and what's the difference between the coverage rates that you see on the side of a bucket that says up to 400 feet per gallon in a coating, and then you go to the warranty documentation and you go, wait, that requires 20 wet mils, which is only 80 feet per gallon, right? There's a big discrepancy in terms of product warranties out there that everybody needs to know about, because it dramatically changes the way you estimate a job and what your expectations are from a manufacturer in terms of how they're going to stand behind the product. So we'll talk about that more over in the coating side of things when we're talking about breathable versus non-breathable coating, get into the wet film thickness with everybody. I think that brings us to questions. Any questions on anything that I've covered kind of on this area of spraying, tip sizes, anything? No? I'm either doing a great job or a horrible job. Grace, is there any, are there any questions over there? Okay. So for right now, Grace, let's go ahead and end that broadcast. And whatever the next thing is, I'll figure it out and we'll get set up here for that. Thanks a lot.